I think people will be a lot more prepared. It's not going to be a surprise at the end of the day. I mean, at Slim, we are creating this collaboration platform. We are focusing a lot on collaboration when it comes to vulnerability remediation. We work with these peers, software producers and consumers, making sure that, for a single vendor, for example, if you have 200 customers that you ship the exact application to, how do you best communicate, making sure that that communication is done properly across all of your customers in a scalable way. That's something that we pay a lot of attention to.
Another edition of Cloud Unfiltered. I am your host, Michael Chenetz, and I have my guest, Ayse, here again. And this is her second time on the show. And thank you for coming twice
I'm
now.
so glad to be here. Yes, I'm a regular right now.
Yeah, it's coming to be a regular thing. It's great. But today, I'm really enjoying this because we're talking about something that is, that I like to talk about, which is security, but not just security, really container security. And it's such a big topic. And when you think about it in the scheme of things, it really is something that people have to take more seriously. I feel like people are in some respects, but in other respects, the way that they go about it, the way that they track it, the way that they're kind of reactive versus proactive, all of those things makes it so that, they say they're interested in it and they want, the intent is there. I shouldn't say the intent is always there, but maybe the way that people are putting I don't know how to say it, how that people are going about it really needs to change in this environment. Does that kind of, I don't know if that's a good starting summation there.
Definitely. I couldn't agree more. Sweetest my ears. Exactly. I like the fact that you're saying, Mike, that people are aware. People
Yeah.
are paying attention. They also know that it takes ample expertise, capital, time to make sure that the containers are safe, secure. But I have numbers to prove that the effort doesn't match the results.
Yeah, so you have the data, you have the raw data, which is awesome. So, talking about that, you guys have just done a container report. So, tell us a little bit about what that is and what it contains.
So there's some tradition to it. I've been doing
Okay.
it for a while with my team right now. So the first report was back in 2021. So we have this like annual thing going on. In 2022, I was a keynote speaker at KubeCon, and I got to share the 2022 report results there. And last week, we released the third annual SlimAI Container Report to look into the state of the art, what's going on in the industry. And this year specifically, we partnered with Enterprise Strategy Group, a well-known institution that does these technology surveys really well globally. So we surveyed security leaders from mid to large organizations and try to understand the human aspect of things. My data science team and we've been collecting this data. SlimAI has been scanning all these containers, public and private, millions of them in a given year. So we can see the data behind the scenes, but this year we have matched it to the human responses, the people who are actually fighting in the war, if you will, the battle. And I will say that the survey matches what we are seeing behind the scenes, that the struggle is definitely real.
So, what is the type of stuff that you look at in these surveys?
So, as I said, there are two types of things: the survey and the raw data. The raw data is mostly container scans. We do X-rays on these containers. We decompose these containers, try to understand what files, packages, special permissions, licenses, what have you, in these containers. The survey aspect is, and we can go ahead and look into the report itself, but in the survey, we ask questions around how they are dealing with the complexities, the challenges of the software supply chain. We ask questions around the vendor-consumer dynamic. So everybody is defining themselves, and this is across the industries. It's not just the technology industry. Every company is a software company. which is like a well-known fact right now. So some of our customers, some of the people that we surveyed, obviously are in this technology sector, about one in third, one in three. But we have surveyed regulated industries. We have surveyed the healthcare, insurance, finance, transportation industries, and everybody is saying that they're either consuming software in containers from vendors, or they're producing these for their consumers. And we ask questions around how many containers, what cadence, how many vendors you're dealing with, how do you communicate with these vendors when there are vulnerabilities in these containers, what's the effectiveness of it, the false positive rates, how accurate these alerts are. They're inundated with these alerts, but how many of them are true positives. We ask questions around the open source, the commercial division of these. We basically try to understand the third party containerized application ecosystem to understand what is going on upstream as well as downstream.
So if we look at the report a little bit, and I'm just going to bring it up. So for those of you that are listening to this on a podcast, you obviously can't see it, but for those of you who are listening on YouTube on the video, you could follow along on screen, which is awesome. So what have we found out? This is the Container Report 2023. What have we found out this year that's of interest, like high level?
Right. We can quickly go over the key findings here. The key findings can give us that high level overview, the executive summary, if you will.
Sure.
The first thing is like, and maybe we can quickly go over what we have found. We have 4, 5, 6 high level insights here, but we can go into the numbers behind the scenes too, right? So the first thing that we said is that the struggle is real. We quantified how security leaders are feeling about achieving their vulnerability remediation goals. Are they feeling reactive or proactive? And we can go into the visuals of that in a second. Then we went into, as I said, the communication aspect of things, consumer producer dynamics. We said the spreadsheet must die. So there's the reliance on that uh, inefficient dynamics of communication, the alert fatigue, the false positives, their rates. And then we looked into the regulatory pressure. How is that affecting these teams across these industries? And ultimately, we said the real cost of all of this, right? You expect it's going to be about reputation, data loss, compliance. But at the end of the day, the big hit is on the performance. 46% of the organizations said it is affecting their team dynamics, their innovation, their competitive advantage in the industry, downtime. Like, right, that's the big deal here.
Wow, that's interesting. You don't really think about that. But as you're actually talking about this, one of the other things that I was thinking about too, and is really, unfortunately, we're in a tech economic kind of downturn, I think, in some respects. And as people are being let go at these organizations, how does that affect, vulnerability management? Because sometimes those are the things that fall through the cracks when things like that occur.
That's such a good point. So people dedicate specialized forces to this effort. We were just talking about how organizations take this seriously, right? So one of the findings in the survey was that, like, how many full-time equivalents, like people, employees you dedicate to vulnerability remediation alone. This is a very technically hard problem. It is not like you can give this to a couple interns, right? You have to have these high tech experts, and one quarter of the organizations we surveyed said that they're employing 10 plus full-time specialists to vulnerability remediation alone, right? So that, like, humans, I know that we are in this, and I am a data scientist. I love AI. We talk about AI automation all the time, but the numbers says that this is still a very human centric effort.
Which is really interesting because when you think about stuff that is really primed for AI and for automation, it's stuff that you can do repeatably. So if there's sources of information, you can grab that information. If there is, and I'm an orchestrator and automator. That's what I like, to automate everything away. That's just me. I'm a scripter. I've done this stuff for years. Anything that can be automated will be automated, but not everybody's like that. And you know, it's interesting in this day and age that that's still the case, because we have so many streams of information. We have so many ways of orchestrating these things. We have so many ways of communicating through APIs to these different repos and to our CI/CD frameworks and things like that. That it doesn't even make sense that this wouldn't be a more automated thing at this point.
I mean, I agree. Being a engineer, I would be so lazy if I can automate something that I can do in 3 hours, a day. I would totally go with the automation flow. I like automation as well. But if you think about the nature of what's going on, right? I am shipping. So maybe we should look at the collaboration aspect of this, skipping a couple things here. This is show, the people, there is this marketplace of containerized software, right? So people are trading containers and sharing risk all the time, and there is, I think that this is why automation is a little elusive in the process. We don't have a centralized place between all these payers, the software vendors and consumers, that they can actually automate things away and maybe transfer the learnings from one payer to the other. Right, everything is done in isolation. So we were just talking about, just to define things, right? We asked our survey respondents. We said, do you primarily identify as a software producer or consumer, or both? 34% said both. 23% said we are producing software. 42% said we are consuming some software from others. And then we said, how many containers do you deploy from these vendors, from producers, in a typical month? And you can see that this is 50, 100, 200 and more containers. This is just a given month. And for each and every one of these containers, you need to go in and look into, it's a very complex thing to understand what's going on underneath. Although, we think of containers as this simple atomic unit of shipping software, very few people can really decode what's going on. And we are not talking about a single container. We are talking about hundreds of containers that are coming to your organization from dozens of software vendors. So 73% of organizations said they work with more than 10 software producers in a typical month. So it is, I think, this aspect of not having that centralized location to make sure that this communication happens properly. That is one of the most important barriers into going into automation workflow.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. I mean, from me, I'm thinking of it very simplistic. I'm thinking of it that, hey, you have a container, it has layers, it has all these different areas. You're looking at the packages inside. You're trying to figure out if those packages have any vulnerabilities. Um, you know, but you're right, if you don't have a central spot to do that, then how do you do that, and how do you orchestrate that? So, that's the key there.
Yeah, at scale. I sometimes joke about this ice cream analogy. If I, ask you to buy me a pint of ice cream, that's one thing. But if I ask you to buy me 20 million of them, right, by next Monday, without letting any one of those pints melt, that's a different problem. So scale
Yes.
is everything.
Yes, I
But one
totally agree.
container attacking a single container, trying to get the vulnerabilities down. Although I'll say, I have this. I lead the rapid prototyping efforts in my company. I have an engineering team that looks into these, getting to zero effective vulnerabilities in containers. And I'll say that even for smaller applications, we have an AI chats, we have an ask AI element in our products, and the containers underneath that, it is not a huge application, but getting to zero effective vulnerabilities even for those containers is not easy for the non-expert or you know, the non-container experts.
So would you say, I'm going to ask, yeah, I'm going to ask it this way. Would you say that it is easier to take a hold of your vulnerabilities for the as a software producer than as a consumer?
So producers are better at looking into
I'm
this.
asking if it's yeah, are the is it easier to take like a stranglehold over your vulnerabilities as a producer of your software and containers
I mean, you
than
are the one creating, right?
yeah.
So the consumer is interested in the functionality. At the end of the day, they just want to um, outsource the functionality that's not core to their business, to their value proposition. And if I was a consumer, I wouldn't be interested in the details of the code, right? I'm looking into making things faster, easier, better when I work with these vendors, and getting a container shipped to you with all these, like, it's not a one-time thing. Obviously there's a cadence to it. Software is a living breeding organism, so they keep updating it. And as a consumer, getting all of this, then scanning it myself, right? There's a, you know this better than me, but there's like tons of scanners out there. Somebody is scanning
Mhm.
with, the scanner XYZ, others are doing it with different things, and then they come to the table discussing this. It's not fun. It's definitely not fun for a consumer who is not in control of, or not even interested in the details of the code that's being shipped to them. But for the producer, obviously, because they are the creators, they can go back to the logic, try to get to the packages that are needed only, versus everything else that has been put into the container during the development process, where the developers are basically having fun. They're just like downloading everything, like not cleaning things up, because there's a sense of urgency to ship for them too, right?
Yeah.
The consumer is waiting, so they're
Yeah.
just like adding things in, and as soon as the thing is working, they stop
They
thinking
stop.
about unnecessary, like I'm just going back and saying all of these, you know what, the 90% of the packages in this container, we didn't really need them. They never really go back and clean things
Yeah, well,
up.
that's the nature also of, pretty much Linux environments too, is that, when you're installing something through a package manager, you're just accepting that, hey, these people have packaged this up the right way. And you're not saying, why is this needed? Why, maybe some of these pieces are optional. And actually, it's funny because if you were to like compile that same piece of software from scratch, there's actually a lot more options. Like you might need SSL, or you might not need SSL, or you might need, so depending on what it is that you're doing, you're kind of just accepting that. And with accepting that, you're also accepting the risks of all those packages that are kind of
Definitely.
coming along with that.
And back to your question, like that inheritance that you're talking about, Mike, right? 67% of the respondents said they're inheriting this attack surface. So
Wow.
right, they're just like, we have just too many container images, the external images, and it is increasing our attack surface. And 63% said getting containers from these third-party producers make it more difficult to triage vulnerabilities. Like even in a large organization, like think Google scale, Microsoft, etc. Like there are all these internal teams. There's that network complexity there as well. Your team just keeps getting these containers from other teams. But when it is an external organization to you, it's even harder. So internally you can probably put pressure much easier, but everybody's saying that they're increasing pressure on their vendors to establish and improve the vulnerability remediation SLAs. But this is, this is not easy for a medium-sized company if they're working with 10 plus producers, making sure that they comply with your SLAs. It's a real challenge.
So when you go back to being a consumer and you're just relying on your vendor or the producer of the container or software, what, how are companies going about ensuring that? Are they just trusting the vendor? Or are they just, how are they trying to figure out a method of trust, you know.
So I'm just going to bring this up. So I get that I get 100 containers from 10 vendors this month, right?
Yeah.
And it's changing. They update it with new functionality, which is great. It's making you faster, and the software probably more dependable, more functional, and whatnot. But the way that they communicate, so I get this. They send the containers, the application, with some scan results if that's in your agreement, right? And they might say we have X many criticals, this many vulnerabilities, and for each and every one of them. So what happens is that there's a list of vulnerabilities that you need to look into, right? Some of these are critical and high. You have different windows for them. You can say, like, maybe most companies says if there's a critical vulnerability that you're shipping to me, it needs to be fixed in the next 15 days, sometimes right away, for me to deploy this to production. For medium low level ones, there is probably a longer time frame. There are sometimes compensating controls. Your vendor might say, if you have this and that, this kind of a network with firewalls and whatnot, this critical incident is not necessarily a real incident, but it all happens in a spreadsheet, in an ad hoc meeting, or in an email. So our most critical software vulnerabilities might as well be broadcasted. And the security aspect is one thing, but this is extremely inefficient. So that spreadsheet has all these vulnerabilities, sometimes hundreds of them, sometimes thousands of them. And what happens is that, that spreadsheets start flying back and forth. So you go in and you say, this scanner that you used, we are not using that. Our scanner actually found a lot more, or there's an intersection, but we don't find some of yours. You don't see some of ours. So there's that negotiation that starts, Mike. It's just so painful, just even to describe. So that negotiation is just about prioritizing what's important. We haven't even started fixing the vulnerabilities yet. Then they agree on a list of vulnerabilities. Now they need to say, okay, this is how I'm going to fix this, or this X vulnerability, it's a false positive, right? Then there is that agreement. And then ultimately they say, we are going to fix this set in this time frame, and here is how we go about that. And both sides agree, and the work starts.
And that's if it's
Yeah.
a commercial product or a commercial. But if it's open source, obviously that could be a totally different time frame. You have to work with committees, you have to work with other, and sometimes it's better. I mean, open source can be better. I mean, honestly, you have more people looking at it, and a lot of times they're on it much faster than some of these orgs that only have a few people. Some of these commercial products that only have a few people look at. So I'm not saying it's worse or better, but it's just different. In the way that you would probably communicate that.
Yeah, the accountability is different. Like, you might have, maybe you might push your vendor a little bit more. There is that deal not closing, that
Yeah.
sense of urgency,
Yep.
right? Doesn't mean that, again, like open source can, the maintainers of open source software are just so good.
Yeah.
There's that piece that we need to definitely acknowledge. But you might, as a consumer, you might feel less control over the third party to take action, to take care, to think about your specific issue versus somebody else's.
Yeah, and unfortunately, money does talk on this in this situation. So if you're a bigger company and you are saying, "Hey, I'm going to spend a lot of money on your software," then they're probably gonna look at those vulnerabilities pretty quickly. I would say,
Yeah.
you
And
know,
there's no such thing as, there's not a lot of vendor scores, and you comparing these vendors that you work with, and you cannot go and say, hey, you vendor X, we're working with 20 others, and you are missing, you do not comply with any one of our SLAs, and you're so behind. There's not that kind of gamification behind the scenes as well. So yeah, it's I keep
so
saying
so
challenging, but it's challenging for the consumer.
So it sounds like there's a need for a new product called like a vulnerability communication system where everybody could like upload their vulnerabilities in a secure channel, could compare them, and could rate different companies. That sounds like it would be a good.
Exactly. That we actually asked that question. We said like that was a strong call for a centralized collaboration platform, just dedicated to decision making, right?
Yeah.
So people are saying that there's this like we need to automate the vulnerability tracking, right? It is one release after the other. The release cadence is like now you're sending me these new um, versions of the containers in the application that I bought from you, maybe every 15 days, maybe it's every quarter. But like being able to track things down, see the vulnerability burn down charts. There's also one other thing, like now the teams, maybe your producer might be working so hard on decreasing the vulnerabilities, but the top level numbers might be just stable, right? It's just still 1,000 vulnerabilities, and you're like, no, you sent me 1,000 vulnerabilities before as well. And the vendor might say, you know what, I have actually removed everything, but there were 2,000 new ones that are coming in. So without seeing what's old, what's new, what's like, the influx, you might not necessarily understand the effort that has been put in to keep the exact same number at place too, right? So yeah, the producer definitely needs to show the effort that they're putting in versus what's happening out there. Because people, I'm sure you're aware, if you go to these vulnerability like public vulnerability databases, the numbers increase significantly too. There are a lot of more security researchers. AI is finding vulnerabilities. So the CVEs are on the rise. No matter what you do, you will see that the same application is getting more CVEs just because of the nature of how these databases are growing.
But it also sounds like we need a better way to like rate vendors because when you think about it, like, okay, well, I have GitHub dependency bot, and I have whatever it may be. Each one maybe is like a Bayesian theory where you're like, you're just giving them analytically a little bit more, points that will lead up to something that says, okay, well, this vendor has an 87 and this vendor has a 98, or so that way there's some point of reference for organizations to try and figure out like, hey, they're really on top of these things, or no, they're at a 50%, maybe we shouldn't.
And how they are evolving over time, right? Maybe
Yeah.
they started at the
Yeah.
place that's maybe not that acceptable, but when others push, especially when multiple companies push against a producer, then that becomes a priority for them, as opposed to just shipping the functionality. Then security safety becomes a bigger problem for them because it's a cluster of important customers asking for it.
So what's the answer? What's the answer to all this? What can people do better? How should people be thinking about this?
Well, I think that the thinking should shift from this like fragmented vulnerability management to a more unified approach. But the numbers that I see definitely call for a paradigm shift, because we already said, right? Like we said, the struggle is real, but organizations are already dedicating significant resources. It's not just more time, it's not more spend, more tools, it's not more specialized teams. Because what right of the success of the industry looks exactly like this, right? When we said, how do you describe your ability to establish and maintain service level objectives for vulnerability remediation? Again, these are companies that are very security conscious, and you can look at the methodology in a bit, but you'll see that everybody cares a lot about the vulnerability efforts in their organizations. But they say like only 12% said they're successful, like
Wow.
despite all the effort. So this 38%, the exact wording of it, I love this one. They said they had moments of success, but there is significant room for improvement. This is not right. Like, and 50% said we are greatly struggling, like despite all of the resources that we are putting
Wow.
into this. So this is definitely an uphill battle. People are feeling behind the curve all the time, and they're feeling that their efforts are mostly reactive. So they're not feeling that the efforts that they're putting in is not like, it's not even like on par with the influx. They keep saying that everything that we do is reactive as opposed to proactive and and um, and 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 in front of the curve.
I mean, that's amazing. It really makes me think of a few things. One is that when I was an IT director, and this was many years ago now, I feel old, but when I was an IT director, people, it really wasn't as containerized. So they were just starting to be containerized, but we didn't have dedicated people that would just look at vulnerabilities. It was whoever the software engineers were, or whoever the people that were working with the software vendors would work with those people. It wasn't dedicated. It was a piece of time. It was like, okay, this person's dedicating, I don't know, 20% of their time to this effort.
Mhm.
So, it's interesting that I guess what we're seeing is that there are more dedicated people, but then you go back, and the other thought I have is that maybe there needs to be better education on actually how to do this, and what kind of tools and how to do this kind of stuff.
Exactly. So this again, I know that I keep going to the challenge, but otherwise, this is what you feel, right?
Yeah.
So this like this piece here again very eye opening to me. 36% of the organizations said they detect vulnerabilities in containers running in production.
Ooh.
This is running in production that require immediate attention on a daily basis, sometimes
Wow.
multiple times a day, right? So it's like your teams, again, these are specialized forces. They're highly technical. They can be working on this new feature, new innovative project that you have, but you keep pulling them daily from their task, which requires deep thinking more often than not, right? To to for sometimes for these false positive alerts, right? Because all these CVEs come in, and these are like in production environments. If this was in maybe in your development environment, you can delay these things. But this is something that needs to get somebody's attention right away. And then when you look into we said alerts and more alerts, like it's very challenging for them to just deal with this. And it's more often than not 4 in 10 alerts, and this is not new. I've been creating these cybersecurity reports, and the false positives have always been an issue, right? But the cadence of how you deal with these is a little different in containerized software. Like everybody says, most of the alerts are false positives, but we are being disrupted every day about these things.
And that's when you think about the nature of software development too. I know when I used to do software development, I would get in a zone and I would just be thinking about it, and I would be highly creative because I'm just iterating on whatever that is, that feature, and really thinking about it, looking at the code, trying to figure out the feature, trying to spec it out, and kind of just being in that zone with my headphones on. Now you're being asked to kind of take your headphones off for a sec. Somebody's knocking and patting you on the shoulder and saying, "Hey, you got to take care of this vulnerability." You've just gotten out of your zone. It's going to take time to get back into that again, and your productivity has gone down tremendously.
And it is not fun too, right? Like working
No.
on this, it's just like it's dreadful at times. I'm the same way. Like I'm a data scientist. I have my deep thinking zones, but when something happens, like a critical vulnerability, it could be a true positive, right? You need to just stop whatever you're doing right now and do it. And if it was once every few months, that's one thing. But we're talking about daily disruption here, which is
Yeah.
unacceptable.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's really the key. And when I think about the perfect world, what I want to see is that everybody has their part. Like as a and this we're absolutely not here, but like repos have a certain way of scanning whatever containers you have, but the information that you exchange has to be standardized, because if we don't get to that, then it's just going to be everybody sending things in the way that they want to send it and what they want to see, and nobody's agreeing on that contract of what to send and what to see. And honestly, we have to get to a better place for supply chain security where people do agree upon this. I mean, there are formats, I'll agree with that, but there's 4 different standards, and everybody's kind of sending things in different ways, and it becomes a real hassle. So we have to get to a point where an apple is an apple. no matter what. And if we have three apples on one place, that's equivalent to three apples in another place. And just because they're smaller apples or bigger apples shouldn't matter, that kind of thing.
Yeah, just and that's because that's the beginning of the effort, right? You can't even agree on what needs to be fixed, which is
Yeah.
really frustrating. And especially,
Yes.
like, it's happening on a spreadsheet. Somebody is commenting, and like, how do you track all of these things, right? I don't accept. And one customer says yes, this is okay for with us. The other customer says it's not really, and then you don't necessarily have a way to create a flow where it's almost like think about all of this effort being centralized so that you can even create a recommender engine. Like most of our 75% of our customers says, given these compensating controls, this CVE doesn't really matter. That's why we made the decision to not focus on this. Customer, your job is to make sure that these things are in your environment. Otherwise, you need to fix these other things. And this learning is transferable to the next customer, the next customer. Then it's a whole different effort. Then, one customer says this other customer says this, other customers, they ignore. But when there's a breach, they will definitely come back at you with the auditors, because you were talking about the pressure of the regulation as well, right? It's like,
Yeah.
this is something that we asked as well. Like, there are all these executive orders. Governments, customers, all of them are demanding a world with zero vulnerabilities. And 1 in 3 of our respondents said the evolving guidance is a top challenge in their organization. So there's just understanding those and coming up with the work streams, significant extra work. Like 53% of the companies that we asked said the executive order is affecting them. And to be honest, like the rest are most of, like, a lot of them are European companies that said, like, about 30% of the companies in Europe said executive order affected and not affecting them for obvious reasons. Like, they are not in that geography, but there are other orders, there are other regulations that affect their geography.
Yeah, no, that absolutely makes sense. And um it's a tough thing. I mean, even when you think about internal politics, not you have several teams. The bigger the organization you go to, they have various teams that work on things, and they don't always communicate, obviously. And so they all have their own CI/CD pipelines. They all have their own container ecosystems. They all have their own software they work on. They have different ways of going about it. They have different policies. They have different logging. So all of these things make it really difficult for organizations to kind of take a stranglehold. I hate to say that, but a stranglehold of everything that they want to understand, because it's not a single environment, it's not a single system, it's not a single vendor, it's not and honestly, internal politics and external politics get in the way of a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, this like high velocity, secure channels of communication, right? Our defenses are not just about the technology that we put in. It's also, it should be, we should fortify the security of our dialogue. Um, it's as if the code is the only important. Like, at the end of the day, it comes to the code, but how we agree on those things, and that entire um, zero effective vulnerabilities or zero vulnerabilities, how to understand that, right? Um, that's something that we need to think more as an industry, because like we are talking about um, the most brilliant brains. You were just talking about how your, like, deep thinking zone was precious to you, right? Being able to get the opportunity cost of, like, the trade-off, right? Making sure that these people are working on what they enjoy most as opposed to just, like, CVE remediation. That should be critical to us, because it's a very it's a very small resource that we have, that we are working with, and very
Yeah.
precious resource.
Yeah, I'd be curious to see, like, if there is a stat out there, and I don't think you have any report, but like, of if people are more unhappy in their job as like, developers who are constantly being bombarded by these things and really feel like they can't be creative in the way that they want to be. and then end up like, either leaving their job or changing jobs or changing the position or doing something different.
I mean, last year when we had another survey with Dimensional Research, we asked, you know, we were asking a lot about like container hardening. Do you understand that? Do you think it's important? And everybody was saying that it's very challenging. They don't understand. Although there was a difference between the managers of the organizations, the people who are not at the forefront, they thought that everything that they understand, they do hardening, they do these things, they do like efficient vulnerability remediation. The people who are in the war zone, the developers, weren't agreeing with the management perception of how things are going. They were definitely saying that it's very challenging for them, and not fun too.
I'm curious if, at the CXO level, like the CISO level,
Mhm.
CTO, if they have an understanding of the importance of all of this, or if it comes into play as much as, on what level does this really become of concern? Is it that, because usually as a CISO, I care more about regulations and, what is happening in the industry, and then I'm pushing down those requirements to teams, and the teams are trying to figure out like, okay, well, what does that translate into tech and security and things like that. So I'm curious about like that dichotomy between, you know the understanding of the importance of that, I guess.
I mean, at the CTO, at the CISO level, I guess we both agree that it needs to be high level. They
Yeah.
cannot know the details, the complexities, the challenges. But the people that we surveyed were pretty senior in their roles, mostly, like we said, senior technology management, cybersecurity management, IT management, risk management. These were the people who had significant decision-making authority. 88% were making or approving purchase decisions. A lot of them, at the same time, characterize themselves as people who have a high or good level of knowledge of the tools and processes for containerized workloads. So they were technical, and they were very security conscious. Nearly all respondents said, 97% said they considered the effectiveness of vulnerability remediation for containerized workloads as critical for their organization. Now, it needs to be like for them, for a CISO, making like bringing this to board level conversations is a regular thing right now. They do talk about these things, but I don't think you can fully grasp the challenge without really going through this. Like, we were just talking about the daily disruption. You need to go through that, and also, you're a creative force for your organization. You innovate things. You're a developer, and that dichotomy, that dilemma between those two can only be lived. You cannot just speak about it at an executive level. Mike, you would agree, I think, about these things.
So are there any key aspects of this that we missed that we really want to get across? Because we're getting towards the end here, and I wanted to make
Yeah.
sure that we really, covered this. And by the way, I think this report is super interesting. So anybody out there, this is the Slim AI. What's the report called again? The Container Security in
Yeah,
2024.
this is SlimAI Container Report. This is our third annual report. There's a tradition to it, and we are trending things over time. And again, we talked a lot about the survey, but we have our own data represented here. So we looked into things like, how like year over year things are changing, right? How many new packages are we seeing? How many of these packages are updated with multiple versions? We looked into the open source containers out there, how often they are being updated, and we noticed like significant upgrade cycles compared to other years. But we also saw there's a lot more packages. There's significantly more. Like, we have remediated 3x more CVEs in that set of public containers that
Wow.
we've been tracking. 3 times more CVEs are remediated, but a lot more CVEs are there right now. So these maintainers of publicly available containers have done 3x the work that they have done compared to the year before. But these containers have, on average, more than 300 CVEs, and that number was in 200s the year before. So things didn't evolve from a high level numbers perspective, although we can quantify the work that has been done. And I think the conclusion here is, it's something that, I'll really keep simple. I do think that the effort is there, the understanding, the awareness is there, but we need a paradigm shift in how we think about approaching the problem. We cannot solve these issues by just sending over spreadsheets, working on one at a time, without a recommender engine. This is the day and age of artificial intelligence, LLMs, right? We talk about automation all the time. The reality couldn't be further from that, right? The collaboration is a necessary glue in a lot of human endeavors, definitely in container vulnerability management. And for it to be effective, clear, right, scalable, we need centralized platforms where the information is collected properly and the learnings are transferred properly.
That's some great, great knowledge and to put out there, because I agree. I think the same thing when I think about this. And I hope that next year when you come back, or when next time you do this report, that we see that where things are getting to be a little bit more automated, that they're using technologies that the amount of vulnerabilities go down. The containers are always going to go up. I don't see that coming down at all, and I hope that they do, because that shows that there's good adoption in that technology. But I do hope that what we see is that somehow, when you think about this, you have to look at, okay, there were more vulnerabilities out there. So even though there are still vulnerabilities in some of these containers, the amount of effort that they put into it, there's actually less. I don't know how you say it. There's still vulnerabilities, but there's the effort put into it. There was a lot of remediation that occurred. That's probably what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. I mean, that we are not going to get people, because people are on top of it. We will probably not say, oh, we didn't really realize that there were all these critical vulnerabilities. We might say that we couldn't be able to get ahead of the curve, and they were there. We knew it, and it still happens. So there was all these penetration points, but I think people will be a lot more prepared. It's not going to be a surprise at the end of the day. I mean, at Slim, we are creating this collaboration platform. We are focusing a lot on collaboration when it comes to vulnerability remediation. We work with these pairs, software producers and consumers, making sure that, for a single vendor, for example, if you have 200 customers that you ship the exact application to, how do you best communicate? How do you get that, one, learning from that CVE that seemed to be critical but doesn't really matter for your application, making sure that that communication is done properly across all of your customers in a scalable way. That's something that we pay a lot of attention to. And the more people use these types of platforms like AI, like, I do deep learning all the time, the better the data, the better these things are tracked, then you can, the next person in line, the next customer in line can learn from this and maybe not even go through the effort, right? I mean, they just see all this, the past scores of these vendors for that CVE. This is, this doesn't really matter in my organization, and here is the reason why, as opposed to, hey, security admin, take this CVE, go do your own research, spend your next few days on this, as opposed to this very creative, fun innovation project. So the less people, the less companies spend time on this wasteful process, I think it's going to be much better for not just for technology industry, but as humans, as a civilization, we can do better things with our time.
Well, I can't say it better than that. So I think that was a great way to end this. And thank you so much for coming on. This has been amazing, and I'm really interested again to see how the next report, turns out. So we'll definitely have you back. And thanks again.
Well, we started collecting data for next year already, so I'll definitely come back with numbers and trend things for us next year.
Sounds great. I look forward to it. All right.
Thank you so much for having me, Mike.
Oh, thank you.